Hello and welcome to another episode of Stripping the Dipping Live. You're joined by your usual co-host, AMG Dens, aka the modern day Morgan Freeman. And what can I say? We're back for this live series of the Stripping the Dipping YouTube channel and a series of this amazing guests that we'll have on throughout the year. Obviously, today is quite an awesome day because we have one of our really special guests, a returning guest actually that we had on last year. He was amazing in terms of his insight, in terms of the knowledge, in terms of just the experience that he was able to build for us and things he was describing, the challenges and some of the obstacles that he's faced in his motorsport career, and just ultimately a really awesome guest to have on. So I'm very excited to have Mike Ogren back in the building again. Mike, how are you feeling, and how have you been doing recently?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you for that glowing introduction. That's very kind. So, and I'm happy to be back. Had a great time with you guys, yeah, last year, and I'm doing great, man. I'm in Florida in the United States, and the weather is perfect, and I'm doing awesome.
Oh, that's amazing to hear, Mike. And again, we were like talking about backstage too, just the amazing weather out there and how envious we are in the UK with
Hmm.
our kind of like cold -1, -2 kind
Yep.
of shebang over here. But no, I mean, it sounds like you've had an amazing kind of time away from the racing, which we'll get into in a second. Also, happy belated birthday shout out to you and Pops as well. Could you tell us like, what you managed to do or get up to celebrate the birthday? Was anything
Sure.
fun or interesting in there?
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, thank you very much. I just turned 31, so
Ooh.
that's getting up there. But yeah, and then my dad's birthday was 2 days later than mine, so we always have a good opportunity to kind of celebrate together. I live well now. I live back near my family, so really happy to go out with my wife and mom and my dad and have a good time. So, um, we actually went to an automobile museum.
Ah.
Yeah, that's maybe half an hour from where we live. Kind of small world. The guy that I had instructed at Sebring late last year, I think, lives in the area. And he says he works for the company that runs the museum. Said, hey, if you're local and you're ever around, come check it out. So what a perfect opportunity, to go for a birthday thing, and spent way more time there than we expected. These guys had just some crazy cars, stuff that I'm a pretty bona fide car nerd, and my dad as well. And there's stuff that we'd never heard of, never seen before. There's I think they said they had 16 or 17 cars that are one of one in the world. Just crazy stuff like that. Old French stuff and just all kinds of stuff. So that was a good time. Um, they got some good food. I got a shout out Torchy's Tacos, which if you're ever in Austin, Texas, is a great Tex-Mex spot. I go whenever I can, whenever I'm out at Circuit of the Americas, and they just opened one actually also right near where we live in Florida. First one in Florida, so we had to go do that to celebrate too. So it was a good day, man. It was a good weekend. Yeah,
Oh man, those are the weekends we live for, Mike, and I'm
that's
glad that
right.
you're able to celebrate it in great spirit too. Because it's a milestone all the time. When you grow older and you see different things, and you're able to spend it with your family and whatnot. And like you
Yeah,
mentioned too, being able to go to like a nice museum with some historic kind of motorbills and to kind of reflect on that as well is always quite interesting. And there's so many things to pick up from that too. So
yeah,
we'll be definitely diving into that a bit more as well. As I'd like to implore our listeners and viewers watching this as well, hi and hello to you guys. Make sure that you hit the thumbs up button. Make sure as well, it's an interactive stream. We do these once in a blue moon. So it's your opportunity, as forever, to chime in with any comments, any questions at all you have for our very special guest with Mike. He's a racing driver, he's an engineer, and he's a driving instructor too when it comes to performance driving and racing. So if you've ever wanted to actually get in contact with a real life racing driver, this is an awesome opportunity. I implore you guys, to get involved in the chat, and any comments you put up there will be on screen as well to interact with us too. So before we move it on a bit, Mike, obviously you did that sensational episode with us last year where we went more into your background, your roots into racing, kind of working in the shop, the mechanical aspect of it. But maybe in like a brief capsule, how would you describe your motorsport background, or how did you get into the kind of position you are in today?
yeah, sure. So yeah, for I'm gonna assume that everyone has listened to all of your episodes, and I
Of
can do this very
course, they'd be
briefly. Yeah, yeah.
obliged.
Of course. So no, but just briefly, I was very lucky to get started in go-karts when I was a little kid. My dad worked at a shop that had some space out back, and I would go putt around in a go-kart and learn that way, just drive around. And I was way too young probably to be in a go-kart, if you ask my mom. Um, and then I was raced karts as early as I could. Um, Graduated up into racing cars as a teenager. I believe I had my road racing license before I had my street driving license. Did some other stuff, autocross, some circle track, but the love was always for road racing. Um, and got into, so SCCA is kind of the predominant amateur road racing series or organizing body in the United States. So got started with them doing amateur racing for as a teenager, and got pretty good at it. Very very luckily, I got pretty good at it for a while, and worked my way up into some other stuff. And then the last few years, been very lucky to race professionally in series such as the Nissan Micra Cup up in Canada, which is an absolute riot of very slow hatchback cars, um, and some SRO touring cars, some IMSA, Michelin Pilot Challenge racing. So yeah, that's the very brief snapshot. I've been very lucky and continuing to kind of build towards where I want to go, and racing and coaching and doing all those things. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a really interesting and almost organic transition from how you went from karting up, to the more competitive leagues that you're in now. And like, it's not to be snuffed at either, bro. Like, we have so much respect for you because if you're talking about the touring car racing, that's a SRO series, which again,
Mm-hmm.
SRO are the same organizers that run the GT3 and GT World Challenge. So that's
Yep.
a huge thing. Also, you mentioned the IMSA kind of Michelin Pilot Sports Series. Again, we actually had Brian Herter and also
Okay.
one of his
Yeah.
crew
Yeah.
chief members as well on here a couple of weeks ago as well, just talking about how competitive it is, the nature of driving front wheel drive cars on the limit and
Mm-hmm.
attacking every circuit. Now there's more endurance races being thrown in there too, so it's a real mix and match of different events. And it's just interesting to get that perspective, even just as European fans ourselves, on that
Yeah.
side of the motor racing scheme as well. So we'll definitely dive into that, whilst we also have viewers inside here as well. We got MJ. What up, MJ? MJ likes to kind of troll me on my gaming channel and whatnot, but we'll keep it somewhat semi-professional today. So MJ, be on your best behavior, man, please. Got F1 Black. What's up, F1 Black, man? My established, esteemed co-host as well in the building. Great to see Black in here as well. We have my amazing girlfriend Abigail inside here too. She's actually sitting right next to me anyway, so I'll be making sure I don't make too many Red Bull jabs, or else I might get poked on the other end of this web camera here. So there's that. And yeah, Black's right to say just lightly tap that like button whilst we're here as well. It helps in any way, shape, or form if you guys can do that. So as always, that's quite nice. And yeah, it's just nice to see everybody here too. So before we go into the next question, Black said, Mike, are you the same Mike Ogren that captained Central Florida in the Ultimate Frisbee? I'll let you answer that question because that sounds
Yeah.
like so.
I
Go for it.
I am. So I don't think we talked about that last time I was on, about other sports, or maybe we touched on it a little bit. I don't remember. But anyway, yeah.
Mhm.
So I did. I played ultimate frisbee at a very high level. Ended up, I know, kind of a weird thing to get into, but growing in popularity for sure. Played at the University of Central Florida in Orlando, Florida, and captained my last couple of years playing there. We made it to the national championship game, but lost the one year that we made it to the finals. So silver medalist in college. Played at the club level for a long time, national levels, and then played under 23 world championships. So won a couple of gold medals playing mixed ultimate frisbee, so men and women on the field together. Competed in London actually, and in Toronto, a couple of gold medals playing ultimate frisbee. And yeah, I played a lot of sports growing up, and kind of fell in love with it in college. And I met my future wife, who was playing for the women's team at the time. And it was a good time. It was basically my entire friend circle in college, and became, like kind of lifelong friends afterwards. So that's who I watched the Super Bowl with, was guys that I played frisbee with in college. So small world.
Definitely, and shout out to
Yeah,
F1 Black too for spoiling that, because
that's
he's
right.
always out there scoping and doing his research.
Yeah,
So
that's
I,
that's a
I,
deep cut, man, from a motorsports show. That is a yeah,
definitely,
yeah,
that's a take I wasn't expecting us to get, but
yeah.
yeah, great to know nevertheless. So come on, we'll get into the next question then. So that is pre-season preparation, Mike. What does that look like in the form for you, like a esteemed motorsport athlete and racing driver like yourself? Are there any rituals that you get up to outside the track when most people are kind of closed for the day, or the seasons have kind of concluded at the beginning of the year? How do you get yourself physically and mentally back in form for the races and seasons ahead? And is there any things that you do kind of like in your personal life? We actually just touched on you doing the frisbee competitions and being quite competitive in other sporting activities as well. Could you give us some insight into that?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of wide and varied. So I know we talked about it a little bit before the show started.
Hmm.
In Florida, there's almost no off season. We can be at the track and racing and at racetracks continuously. Basically, Sebring, Daytona. Obviously, the Daytona 500 was this weekend. The Rolex 24 was in January. So I've been coaching in Florida and racing in Florida, and then coaching as well in Texas at Circuit of the Americas and out in California at Sonoma, which is formerly Sears Point, which might ring more of a bell. I'm not sure. But basically, from an on-track standpoint, hasn't really stopped for me. I've been lucky to see or been lucky to go to tracks and kind of continue to just be at racetracks, sometimes coaching, sometimes racing. And then off the track, it's similar stuff that we've talked about before. A little bit of sim work. I actually haven't been as active on iRacing as I was most of last year because I've been busy at real racetracks, which is a good trade-off. And then, like you said, kind of touched on some sports stuff. I like to go for bike rides. Where I live has a beautiful biking trail, so get out and go for rides occasionally, just again for the fitness, kind of baseline fitness. I hate running, is what I've learned. So going for a run is good, but it's very frustrating for me. So I found that biking tends to be a better kind of cardio workout for me. And then we've really gotten into we just started playing pickleball. I don't know if that's familiar to anybody, but
Like,
it's
please elaborate.
yeah. So pickleball it's a racket sport. So somewhere in the tennis, squash, badminton, what's the other one? Yeah, in that realm, but it's somewhere
Mhm.
halfway between like tennis and table tennis.
Okay.
So you use a paddle rather than a racket. So and then like kind of plastic wiffle balls on a
Mhm.
smallish tennis court. So I'd never heard of it until a couple of years ago, and it's very apparently was very popular in kind of older folks communities.
Mhm.
Um, but as it's gained more recognition, younger folks or former tennis players or whatnot are getting into it. And my wife and I, tried it out, went out with some friends, and we're like, "Oh, this is super fun." And that's been kind of our way of going out and staying in shape and getting exercise and kind of challenging the mind too, right? Like it's like I said, both me and my wife are very competitive. If that's not
Mhm.
obvious from some of the background we've shared, um, so being bad at a sport is very frustrating and a little bit foreign, right? Like I said, I played ultimate frisbee at a very very high level, pretty good in a race car, and it's very odd to go out and be bad at stuff. But I think the mental preparation that comes with that of how to learn, how to what do other people do. We're watching videos about how to get better and all that stuff. It's such a good kind of refresh on okay, I can focus on this other thing that'll keep me in shape. But I'm also learning kind of how to learn something that was foreign to me a few months ago.
Yeah, I think that's really key, Mike. And you touched on so many great points there in terms of like from the mental point of view, staying sharp, and also as well learning how to continue learning. I think for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us, when we get to one kind of stage, or when we get comfortable in one particular dynamic, we can lack that motivation sometimes to continue to push and to continue to learn. I don't think that you change or you improve or you get better or adapt if you just stay at one kind of peak at all times. So I think
Yep.
it's amazing you mentioned that, even just kind of jumping into sport that, you weren't so kind of comfortable with before, or you didn't know so much about even before trying it. And then, like
Hmm.
you said, like trying to take it seriously, trying to like constrict every single part of it to improve and get better and better. Obviously, the competitive aspect comes from doing that with your wife as well, which I can imagine
Right.
gets quite tense at times. But that's super cool. And you mentioned other stuff as well, like doing the kind of driving instructing as well, which we'll talk about quite a lot with the Skip Barber racing kind of series and like program as well, because it's a huge thing, and I think it needs to get talked about more, to be fair. So that's going to be one of our big kind of talking points. But
Sure.
it's just interesting, just to see the eclectic mix of different things that you do as like an athlete and a driver as well, to kind of keep yourself sharp. And you mentioned iRacing as well, man. I have to add you at some point too, so we can get on track, maybe do some races together. But
Sure. Yeah.
man, it's just super awesome just to hear that, and also just to see just how dynamic you are in your approach to training and working towards every season. So that's really cool. And we'll read a couple of comments here. So we got got boss lady Georgina in the building. What's up, Georgina? Big shout out to you. Thank you as always. I know that the time difference there must be crazy, but yeah, we'll keep you up with some interesting facts and just some awesome motorsport talk. And yeah, let's get to the next question then. So we've also talked about the world of motorsport, and then one of
Hmm.
the special events that happened this week was the big 500. It was the Daytona 500 for the NASCAR guys out there. Now, I'll be honest with you, Mike. I'm trying to get myself more into the world of NASCAR. I think I picked it up and put it down, picked it up and put it down. I've seen the likes of Jimmy Johnson. I've seen the likes of like, Pablo Montoya toy around with it quite a bit. But I think it was Bubba Wallace for me that and Michael Jordan coming into the sport as an investor that made me want to kind of take a look at it a bit more. And obviously with Daytona 500, that is basically NASCAR's like Monaco. For those who don't know, it's like a huge special event. So we're talking about off stream, and I know that we aren't the craziest NASCAR fans, but what did you think of it? Because a couple of talking points, Travis Pastrana making his debut. We also have to talk about bump drafting, because I think in
Yeah.
NASCAR racing, it gets a stick. My girlfriend Abby always says, "Motor racing is this car's going around in circles," and I was like, whilst that technically is correct, I think that is what most people assume NASCAR is, because it is literally ovals. But then again, with these next gen cars, there's just so much to them in terms of aerodynamic wake, trying to follow each other in a tow, like teaming up together in packs. And you see the Toyota guys, the Camaro guys, etc., etc. And Bubba Wallace getting really unlucky. He got, I think, bumped by one of the cars behind, that got bum drafted from a car behind. So that was a bit
Mhm.
nuts. And then huge crash with 19 laps to go, and Steinhaus Jr. takes the win. So amongst all of what I just mentioned there, Mike, was your like standout points from the Daytona 500? Have you ever considered Indy or like oval racing at all?
Yeah. So the extent to which my Daytona 500 viewing was almost exactly the same recap that you just gave. So I'll share some insights into Daytona and bump drafting and all that. But this particular race, like I said, I was celebrating family birthdays, and that's the priority, brother. So
Mhm.
sorry to the fans at home. I don't have on lap 224 this or that happened. I'm not going to be able to share a whole lot about that, but I think. So Daytona 500, the cars basically are running, or at least they used to before the new gen Cup cars. They're running restrictor plates, so they don't go too fast. The track is huge, right? So they're basically full throttle for the entire race. And yeah, on the surface, it's just turn left and then turn left and then turn left and then turn left and keep turning
Mhm.
left. But you touched on it, perfectly. The strategy of bump drafting and when to team up with somebody and when to kind of pick your battles. It's a long race. It's a 500-mile race, a lot of laps. You said, a few crashes. There's always the big one that they call it at Daytona, and Talladega is the other kind of big, like huge super speedway on the NASCAR calendar that basically you're just trying to survive until the end of until, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 laps to go. That number's different for everybody, but you got to have a car to compete with by the end, and staying out of trouble is part of that. So some people say, well, if I've got a fast car, I can only hit so many cars in front of me if I'm at the front of the pack, right? And some guys say,
Mm,
well, I don't want to push that hard to try to get to the front, so I'm just going to kind of hang back, and survive. And then all of a sudden, you're 20th at the end of the race. You get a good draft, and all of a sudden, you're in the top 10. So
mhm,
um, it's a fascinating. Again, bump drafting comes to play occasionally in road racing, but certainly, a huge obvious example is NASCAR and circle track stuff. Um, the new gen cars, as a lot of you probably know, are closer and closer to almost a GT3 style car. Just from the body work is carbon now. It's much stronger. It's not steel where it's going to bend and deform. It's going to be either it's there or it's broken. And the suspension geometry is updated. The wheels are center lock now, which is crazy. I can't believe that actually went through. Um, and they're running one at Le Mans as a kind of demonstration car. You mentioned Jimmy Johnson and a couple other very high profile folks are driving that car at Le Mans. So the car is closer and closer to a GT3 style car. So the interest, or sorry, the transitory, sure, we'll go with that. Properties of that become more interesting to a road racing type person. Um, and for me, I think that was your other question there. Like I said, I did a little bit of circle track stuff in high school. Um, I never really fell in love with it. Again, just kind of the simple reason being, on the surface, it just looks like, you turn left, and
mm,
of course, different tracks. Okay, yeah, you have to brake or you have to decelerate, and when you pick up the throttle, the car setup is very important. A millimeters difference of throttle application, brake application, how hard is it on the tires, that kind of stuff. Um, but I learned a lot from it. Racing in a pack of 20 cars on a 3/8 mile oval, and then racing in a pack of 20 cars on a 3-4 mile road course track. You get very, very comfortable being nose to tail, door to door. So the skills translate really, really well from oval, circle track, whatever you want to call it. But it just never, I never fell in love with it as much as road racing. So
yeah, and I think that's fair, Mike. I mean, there's always like a different kind of demographic for each type, and I think it keeps it interesting that, we're seeing like for sports or in the motorsport world, like two different disciplines of motorsport that are so radically different now in a period of time where you're starting to see a bit of overlap or crossover. Like you mentioned
mhm.
as well, I think it's the Garage 56 guys that are running
Yep.
that like very special entry into Le Mans, which is nuts because I mean in a weird way, Le Mans has always been about crazy prototypes or running things that shouldn't even be in a motor race. So to have a
Right.
nice car in a Le Mans race, it already seems bizarre to me. But the way they've adapted that car, the way how, they're going to do the BOP for it as well, things they'll look at as well, like fuel mileage, tire consumption and stuff like that as well, plays a huge key role into it. And something definitely I feel will be good for the image of NASCAR in itself in terms of pushing the technological aspects of it, but
For
also
sure.
just like encouraging different fans to check it out because there's so many
Hmm.
different drivers, teams, dynasties, and etc. So one question we got here from Blag as well is which one's better? And this I can see it dividing people, but we'll get your take on it there, Mike. Which one's better,
Yeah. So
NASCAR or IndyCar?
I think it depends on what you're after. I think that again, NASCAR oval racing to me can be can be rather boring. Just
Mhm,
the simple inputs are you're turning left. It's hard to appreciate the nuance of that.
mhm,
Now, NASCAR on road courses is incredible because these cars are terrible at road courses, right? Again, the new generation cars are better than the previous ones, but
mhm,
watching a huge, heavy car with a ton of power that weighs too much and has terrible brakes try to navigate Watkins Glen is amazing, right? Versus, okay, it's made to be a missile on a super speedway, and it's very good at that. Watching cars do what they're bad at makes for excellent racing. So NASCAR on road courses, I think, is incredible. IndyCar, on the other hand, probably has the most impressive combination of disciplines out there right
mhm,
now. It certainly does. They're running ovals, they're running true road courses, they're running street courses. Saint Grand Prix of St. Petersburg is coming up on the IndyCar schedule. I think it's the first race of the season. and that is just a couple weeks out, and that's half an hour from me. So I'll be down there checking that out. Um, but they've got, I mean, the grid of drivers in IndyCar, it's so competitive. A guy can win one week and then he'll be 20th the next week and then back on the podium the following week. You know, they all have slightly different skills. The cars are similar enough that the driver talent certainly is making a difference, but it seems very, very like a level playing field.
Mhm.
And for open wheel cars, you know, that's pretty impressive because obviously you compare that to Formula One, you know, kind of the other preeminent open wheel series that we all know, and that's not the case, of course. So I think the my non-answer there is it kind of depends on what you're looking for.
It was a very diplomatic answer there, Mike. I think fans will appreciate either way because you gave a good response there. And before we change up the topic again, Bly's kind of thrown another one inside there. So let's put that one in. Who has a better racing etiquette, North Americans, Europeans? And does etiquette vary by state? That's a really interesting question I never thought
It
of.
is, yeah. So in again, in my experience, maybe I haven't raced so much with and against European drivers. You know, I've done most of my all of my racing in North America. Of course, some European drivers racing in IMSA and SRO, that kind of thing. I haven't noticed anything obvious between the North American or European or any other culture driver that has really stuck out to me. It's more the level, and that's, I mean, not shocking, right? You'd think the higher level folks would, you know, you can tell they're either going to have proper racing etiquette or they're intentionally not going to.
Yeah.
You know, some of the coaching I've been doing here in Florida at Sebring is kind of regional level, you know, fairly low level amateur road racing, you know, at historic tracks like Sebring and that kind of stuff. But you know, what you see from the level of awareness of folks can be a little bit scary sometimes. And it's not, it's just simply because they don't know, you know, the level of awareness is low. It's not intentional poor etiquette. It's a lack of awareness. And that's something, of course, as a driving instructor, is one of the things that I'm constantly trying to work on with folks that I coach. You know, it's, yeah, I want you to be faster. Yeah, I want you to be a better driver, but you know, you got to know, I have to be safe and comfortable sharing a track with you is kind of my baseline criteria. And I haven't noticed much of a difference regionally either, whether it's, yeah, southern United States, northern United States, up in Canada. Um, Racing drivers are racing drivers. From what I've seen, there's, you know, you can be pleasant and you can be unpleasant no matter where you are.
Absolutely, you know, and I kind of take those points in on board as well because I guess when a real race driver like yourself goes to the circuit and they put their helmet on, you don't look at what nationality or kind of where this driver's from. It's just ultimately a rush to who's going to be the quickest, who's going to be the bravest, who's going to be the most strategically smart in terms of how they play the race. And like you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned too, having the great foundations of good racing etiquette can put you in stead for, you know, getting the top places or finishing the races or even just having the awareness as to when to push, when to defend, when to, you know, like let go and then come back later on in the race as well. So really interesting question there, and I'm just very insightful to take that view from you as well. So on another motorsport series as well there, Mike, let's get into a bit of GTP LMDh then, because on the topic of Daytona, we had the 500, well, last week, and a couple of weeks before that, we had the Daytona 24 hours, which is literally another eclectic mix around the entire length of the circuits, not just the oval, but the infield section for our listeners out there and fans. And really cool as well to see again mixed category racing because you had the LMDh, which is practically, I guess, what the LMP ones would have been in such era or time. You had LMP2s, you had LMP3s, and then on top of that as well, we had some like GTD cars as well, split amongst Pro and AMS. So that's GT3 for us Europeans as well. But to kind of narrow it a bit, Mike, you know, what was your thought on the debut of these new GTP cars? Because you got Porsche, you got Acura, Cadillac, BMW, you name it. You got like a list of different manufacturers there, and it's a really interesting formula where manufacturers can pick whatever chassis they want, they can pick whatever engine they want, but the hybrid system, as we're going into this era of like, you know, sustainable motor racing, has to be exactly the same for each team. So although on the hybrid side, everything's exactly the same. The cars look different, they sound different, and also we're getting a lot of different competition as well between like other factory teams such as Penske, Meyershank Racing, Chip Ganassi, all in the pot as well, trying to stir it up for honors as well. So, what's your thought about like the first race, some of the testing as well they've done at the different circuits, and how do you see that particular series going in the future?
I, I think it's awesome.
Mhm.
You know, the new GTP cars, LMDh, combined, whatever we're calling them, it's incredible. I think the previous iteration in North America through IMSA was DPI, which was the class name was an evolution of Daytona prototypes, but the DPI concept, as you kind of touched on, was the first where they said, "Oh, okay, race whatever engine you want and make the body work, somewhat look like your road cars so that you could tell a Mazda was a Mazda and a Cadillac was a Cadillac and Acura was an Acura."
Mhm.
And that's amazing for a prototype car that looks, the rest of it looks nothing like a road car.
Mhm.
You look at the Toyota LMP1 car, you would have no idea that's a Toyota if someone didn't tell you, right? So I think the concept of saying, yeah, style it how you want so that you can market it appropriately, put whatever engine in it you want so you can market it appropriately is tremendous. The Porsche, uh, is beautiful. The BMW is beautiful. The Acura looks awesome. Cadillac, like I've talked to, all the different folks I've talked to, everyone's got a different favorite car, which is exactly what you want, right? Just, oh, I think this car looks great. Oh, I think this one doesn't. And you've got, yeah, different engines racing against each other on a level playing field. You got V8, V6, and I don't think there's a four cylinder currently. I know when Mazda in the DPI formula, they had a four cylinder even. So, the fact that you can, is running huge turbo boost or whatever, but the fact that they can equalize all of those and they can market that, hey, this is, of course, not the same engine, but similar to what you can buy in a street car or whatever, is amazing for marketing. And if you can get manufacturers to buy in, well, we're seeing the car counts already in just the first year of this are better than they've been for a long, long time. And I think that's going to be the case. It'll translate over to Europe as well, where you've got, Ferrari with the LMDh platform. And I think there's one other that's LMDh
I think
that's not.
Lamborghini have a project as
Yep,
well in the works with Roman Grosjean, but yeah.
that sounds right. Yeah. So I mean, again, you've got four or five, maybe six different manufacturers that are all, willing to come play at the highest level of sports car racing. And that's amazing. You saw, again, kind of touching on the LMP1 category, it's kind of dying, right? It was like, oh, is Toyota going to beat Toyota this year?
Yeah.
And sometimes they did, and sometimes they ran out of fuel on the last lap, but or broke something. But my only gripe with GTP is that they called it GTP, and I get it. So, of course, I know that your fans are incredibly well educated about racing history, and they know that GTP, is back to the days of these beautiful Nissan, prototypes and all the other cars that were kind of in the, I think it'd be early 90s, maybe would be the kind of height of the GTP
Mhm.
era. So that's what they're trying to go back to, this new kind of golden age of prototype racing. And I get it. But when you've got GTD and GTD Pro, and then LMP3, LMP2, and then a car that looks a heck of a lot like an LMP2 or 3, and you call it GTP, I think it's difficult for a new fan to follow.
Mhm.
That's kind of my only gripe. So, but I think the cars themselves, even from the first time they started testing, you'd see videos on Instagram or whatever, and the launches out of the pits, right? They start them under electric power, and then they switch on the engine. And when that car goes from electric power, and then you hear the V8 fire up, 200 feet away, it's like, oh, that's cool. And you're hearing that with all of them, and it's like, oh, that's pretty neat. And to make the, as you said, kind of environmentally friendly hybridization era that we're going into cool and fast and appealing to a motorsports fan is a huge win. And I guess one other just thought on that topic is I didn't know this until much closer to the race, is they um, because the hybrid because of the hybridization of the cars, like you said, the the energy or storage units, batteries, whatever, are fairly, I believe they're spec or same across all teams.
Mhm.
Um, but they are limited on total energy consumption. So
Ah.
the cars, basically their pit window, so how long they could run on the track before, coming into the pits to recharge, to get gas or recharge the battery or whatever, wasn't necessarily how much fuel do we have in the tank. It was, you're allowed, I have no idea what the number was, some number of joules or megajoules or whatever it was total
Mhm.
between your gas engine and your electric motor that you were allowed to expend before coming into the pits.
Ah.
And the penalty for exceeding that was, incredibly harsh, like a couple of laps or something like that. So,
Huh.
yeah. So, so that was the formula, which I didn't really realize that until much closer to the race, and just a really interesting way to do that rather than like, oh, are they going to run out of gas? I have no idea, but they're about to exceed, whatever, 1,000 megajoules or whatever it was. So that engineering aspect becomes, okay, well, we need to now consider all these different variables, and your energy readings and how much consumption you're having per lap. You have to be pretty spot on. And these are cars that are brand new and have done some testing, but until you get in a race, you're not 100% sure exactly what that consumption is going to look like. So I thought that was pretty fascinating from a engineering perspective.
Oh, absolutely, Mike. And for me as well, I didn't even know that aspect of it too, because again, it adds another kind of feather into the cap to say, to think about this already, how much strategy, how much stress the engineers will go through with the safety cars and the cars being able to unlap themselves, whether you take new tires or not, because even with these new LMDh cars as well, they've got a Michelin compound tire, which they've deliberately made quite distasteful on the first lap. It takes the tire quite some time to come in. And sometimes it's a case of do I double stint the tires just ultimately because the outlap would be quicker if I use tires that slightly worn but up to a warmer temperature and operating window rather than taking a completely new set of stickers and then it taking forever for them to come up to that kind of operating window. So
Yeah.
really interesting. And then like you
And I think
mentioned with the sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think they were also more limited on the number of sets of tires that they gave to teams this year than
Ah.
previously.
Mhm.
So I think like you kind of had to double or maybe triple stint a few times throughout the 24 hours. So overnight when the temperatures are down, something like that, you basically had to double or triple stint just to, have a clean set of tires to fight with at the end of the race or whatever. So again, I was actually coaching during some of the 24, so I didn't get to watch a ton of it. But what I did see, I think it was Castor Nevis and the Acura. I think on a restart, lost it into turn one, um, locked up the brakes, brought to a stop. Car was fine, whatever, but they had to change his tires, and I don't remember if they were fresh tires or not. But that's a set of tires that they had to put on. That now, okay, well, do we have to do an extra double stint in the middle of the night, and how is that going to compromise us? So, that one little mistake ends up, impacting the strategy dramatically. And I think that's cool from again, an environmentally friendly standpoint. Of course, the number of tires that we go through in a race weekend, especially like that, it's astounding. If you've never seen that in person, go to the Michelin tent or whatever it is for a big race, 24-hour race, 12-hour race, whatever it is. It is overwhelming to behold. Um, but anyway, the fact that they're trying to reduce that from a cost standpoint and rubber consumption standpoint is, I think, is a good thing and adds that additional strategic element. So anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. And I think, again, great insight for our listeners and myself as well included, because, again, it's something that we don't really see much of, in terms of just how manufacturers, tire suppliers are going about, trying to make racing cost effective and affordable for most. And like you mentioned there too, even in the racing strategy, if you destroy a set of tires, if you lock up and flat spot the tire, that could completely ruin all the hard work and the strategy that the team have devised throughout the weekend. So it's really interesting. And whilst we have a few comments, got RVD making a wisecrack here. GTP, Graduate Teacher Program. Funny. Black tried to beat him with CGV, Cars Go Vroom. That could catch on. I can see that catching on. A little debate between Georgina and Abby as to whether or not pineapple goes on pizza. I'll leave that for another day. Uh, but on a more serious note, RVD asking, can they recycle tires? And I don't know if he means in terms of if they take a set off a car, you always see kind of the Michelin guy or the Pirelli guy, because we don't favoritize tires over here, taking like a blowtorch gun and like scraping off all the gunk on the tire. Is it possible to scrub them in for another run if they're not too badly beaten to the thread?
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's different, yeah, I guess to your point of what do you mean by recycle, there's a couple of different levels to that answer, I suppose. One would be, okay, the tires are done and not usable anymore. Where do they go? And unfortunately, a lot of times they just kind of get thrown away into a garbage heap or landfill or whatever, and just take up space for a long time. And sometimes it can be recyclable. They use that stuff. I know it's become somewhat common for like as like a mulch replacement. You'll see like shredded rubber, and that's mostly old tires. I've seen that occasionally. Um, it's difficult to kind of entirely break down a tire to like make a new one, for example, because there's so many components that go into it. So of course we all see the rubber of the tire, but there's a lot of metal in them as well. So you hear down to the cords maybe, or down to the there's metal that goes around the tire that's kind of creating its structure and the strength of the tire,
Hmm.
and then the rubber is kind of molded in and around and whatever to create what we know as a tire. So it's very difficult to, I don't know, melt down or burn or section or whatever, to get back down to those individual components. Because, like I said, there's multiple plies of like nylon, almost looks like a string, and then steel belts that go into a tire, and and then the rubber. So it's very difficult to actually recycle and fully reuse the components of a tire. Um, but there are other uses, like I said, you see the mulch replacement, you see, the tires that line racetracks in front of barriers or whatever. Those might be old racing tires sometimes. And of
Hmm.
course, there's only so many of those because they don't get replaced that often, but that is an outlet sometimes. Um, and then your point is absolutely depending on, I did a fair amount of racing on other people's tires in my day, and that's funny enough, kind of dictated what class I ended up racing in at one point. But I'll expand on that in a second. But yeah, so basically, um, it depending on how much of a performance drop off, so lap time performance drop off there is between a brand new set of tires and a set of tires that has 1 lap, 2 laps, an hour, 2 hours, 12 hours on them, may, again, to the point of strategy, do we put stickers on? Can we double stint? Can we triple stint? Um, may dictate what's done with those tires. So um, at high level sprint racing, for example, you may have a tire that's very good for 10 minutes, right? The first lap is if you're on a qualifying lap, you got to get it done in the first lap, and then all of a sudden you're a second slower on lap 2 or 3. And then maybe it falls off another second, but it kind of stays there for a little while. Well, if you're racing, you have to put new tires on for the race. But can you practice on those, forever, and they're going to be a second or two slower? Sure. So you'll see, that aspect where, okay, we're just going to keep these tires for practice, or sometimes they'll be sold. And you go, hey, can I try to buy some takeoffs from guys that are putting on brand new sticker tires for every session? You'll see that a lot of kind of the secondhand racing tire market certainly
Hmm.
exists because, just because tires are a second or 2 seconds slower doesn't mean that they don't have any life left. It just means that they've got that initial qualifying lap, magic is gone from them, but they may last another multiple hours of track time. So
That's a really interesting take, and thank you again, Mike, for that really expansive answer because it kind of covers both strands, in terms of like in the wider society if they can be recycled, but then also in a racing context too. And then with different series, you see like you mentioned as well, like scrubbing of tires or maybe like buying them secondhand on the market from other teams and stuff. So
yeah.
really interesting and great question there from RVD too. So we'll get on a bit more to you, Mike, because you had a very sensational end to 2022. And we're actually speaking about it off air, but to kind of introduce and segue this topic, the SCCA Super Tour Series and your success in that, Mike. Because, if I do so myself, just like, you entered the series with a Volkswagen Sirocco, which I'll let you add context to as well. And let me just put it this way: you absolutely whoop their ass. Like that's me being like humbly modest. Like you set pole, you basically won two, I think, of the three races that weekend, and then on top of that as well, you set a lap record for that category and class of car as well. So for new timers, looking to understand more about that series and also your approach and your epic kind of like run with the family Sirocco as well. Tell us more about it and just your approach to that series and how that came about.
Oh, you summed it up perfectly. Next question.
Thank you.
So no, it's funny, and what I was referencing about the tires, I'm actually going to kind of bridge into this question too. So, um, so I run a Volkswagen Scirocco in a racing series called SCCA, SCCA, which is again kind of the standard or most popular sanctioning body in the United States for motorsports. They run, from fairly, entry level, regional level racing up through what's called the Hoosier Super Tour, sponsored by Hoosier Tires, and then the national championship runoffs. So one race to win it all, to win a national championship, which is crazy. Most series are like, okay, do you win the points championship, whatever. But this is like 40 minutes, who's the best, which is nuts. And that's at VIR this year. So the reason I was talking about the tires is originally when I was racing the Scirocco early on for me, we were running on takeoff tires from another series that were the tires fell off a little bit, and the guys would just leave them at the end of the weekend. Hey, we'd get a dozen of them, for pennies on the dollar because they'd gotten slower, but they'd last, a long, long time afterward. Well, that class that we'd been getting them from that fit our car well changed their tire rules basically from a DOT legal tire, which they're certainly not, but I can get into that, but it's really boring and nobody cares. But DOT legal tire versus a full racing slick. And the full racing slick required us to race in a faster class. So that because this other class changed their tire rules, we were getting tires from those guys as they're, after they took them off after their race. So we then had to move into a faster class, and then because of that. So anyway, that's my full circle on the tire comment as well. But yeah, so the race of Volkswagen Scirocco in SCCA Super Tour, kind of the highest level that SCCA offers. And I've been very fortunate the last few months to race at Sebring a few times. I think you were actually referencing late in 2022, we went to basically a regional race. So Sebring, if you've seen it on iRacing, you're probably familiar, even if you're not local here, can be split into a north club track and a south, school track or whatever. You got it teed up for me. Perfect. So a south club course, as well as the full, 3.7 mile, 12-hour course that we're probably all more familiar with. So we went to a regional race at the club course because we saw the track record and we were like, I think we can get that. And it's not run super frequently. So we went and we got the track record, won 2 out of 3 of the races. The third one, I had a pretty massive tire failure, which was pretty ugly. I posted some pictures of it on Instagram. You could see, again, most people never even see metal cords on a tire, but this was like the cords blew out and it was pretty violent. So unfortunate. But again, we got the job done, got a lap record. And then going back a little bit, my dad had actually run in the same car the other configuration, the short course of Sebring, what's called the school course. So awesome configuration. They almost never race it. It's used for driving schools. We use it for Skip Barber quite a bit, but it's rarely raced. But you get turn 1 at Sebring, which is one of the best corners in the world. Turned 17 at Sebring, also one of the best corners in the world. And you just mostly do that. You get the 2 straightaways, you turn around, do it again. So anyway, my dad had set the lap record there earlier in 2022 as well. Great. So now the Hoosier Super Tour first race this season was at Sebring mid-January, and we decided that our car was very fast for its class, but it could be faster. So we added a splitter to the front end and did a whole lot of work over the off season trying to add some front downforce, which, it's a Volkswagen Scirocco. It's not exactly known for its aerodynamic, beauty. So we did a lot of work over the off season, designing and engineering and putting the splitter on the car. And the lap record at Sebring for our class, which is called H production. And, well, it's important, I guess, the context that we were talking about before the show, at 2,100 pounds, so just under 1,000 kilos, is one of the heaviest cars in the class. So we race Volkswagen Scirocco's, 80s, Honda hatchbacks, Civics, CRXs, some newer hatchbacks, Mazda 2s, that kind of stuff. Okay, that all makes sense. And 60s British Roadsters. So Triumph Spitfires, Bug Eye Sprites, and they run 500-600 pounds, maybe 200 plus kilograms lighter than us. So we're the muscle car of the group with, at 2,100 pounds, which is crazy. So the lap is just made in a totally different way, but the lap time ends up being very similar. So anyway, the lap record at the Sebring full course was set by a very, very fast driver in a Triumph Spitfire. And we were friends with the guy, we've raced against him a decent bit. And he's like, you're never going to break that record. No one's ever going to break that record. Because he, to his credit, he drove a very good lap, and he had a draft from an out-of-class car. So again, this is this tiny little British Roadster that's incredibly fast in corners. Okay, well, now he got a draft from, I don't know, something bigger than him that's punching a hole in the air, and he was now, very fast on the straightaways for that one lap as well. So you're never going to touch it. It's been, I think it's been there for like 6 or 7 years. So okay, yeah, it's pretty fast. So we broke it is the short story. We broke it by almost a second, which is incredibly satisfying. We went out on Friday, practiced again with the new splitter. First time we driven the car, and it took some time to get used to. Just felt kind of foreign, having driven that car so much for so long. Took a little bit of getting used to. And then the first race, it was nice and cool. Temperatures were down, so engines make more power when it's cold out because the air is denser. And again, it was like, oh, okay, we're pretty close. We got a chance at this thing. And kind of was fairly patient until I also saw an opportunity to get a draft from another car, and then was able to put down a lap record lap, and it was incredibly satisfying. Like my in-car onboard video is really strange because it's like, I don't know, lap 7 of the race, and I've got a little lap timer in the car. Lap 7 of the race, and I've come across start finish line, and I'm pumping my fist, and I'm all excited. And usually you see that at the end of the race, someone wins the race, they get the check, yeah, I won, and I'm in there in the middle of the race celebrating, for good reason. I have no shame about that at all. It's just a very strange video. So anyway, got the lap record, won the race in our class, going away, and then backed it up again. So that was on Saturday. They usually do 2 races on the weekend. Backed it up on Sunday with another win. So it was awesome. Maximized points for the Super Tour series, and trying to get set up for hopefully doing going to the national championship runoffs later in the year. So.
Man, that is super impressive. And just even for myself, just as a avid viewer and kind of like, watcher of motorsport as well, just to see the dynamics of how the racing works in that class too, with you mentioning the Triumphs and the Spitfires and the British kind of cars being quite low and kind of like low in weight and kind of density as well. But then you mentioned as well, like with you and the Scirocco, which is like a Frankenstein machine that's like a comfortable glove because it's run through the family with you and dad as well, and running that car and still being competitive and getting results out of it is hugely satisfying, especially from somebody who gloated about having the record and the advantages they had with getting a tow, and then you just going out there and blitzing it, so that's major. But kind of on the topic of it, because like you mentioned, we had like a Very nice segue for that too. Magic Mike. I mean, I know that this podcast is called Stripping the Dipping, but there'll be of no such things today. But Mike, talk about the magic of Sebring for you, because it's a track that you hold quite sincere to you. Obviously getting a record there as well is phenomenal. And for me, it's a circuit I love, but it's a very technical circuit in the sim, in racing games, let alone real life. And you also mentioned VIR as well in terms of Virginia International Raceway too. Like, how does one master a circuit like that and get comfortable with all the undulations, the bumps, the blind corners, the final turn as well, which feels like it takes an age to get the nose in, and then the kind of undulation and bumps as well, with it being such a weathered circuit as well.
Yeah, Sebring. I mean, you teed it up perfectly. Man, it's my favorite place in the world. It's partly because it's got, it's kind of my home track. It's just a few hours from me, so I've got more laps there than I do anywhere else. I know it really well, and that certainly plays a part. But again, turn one at Sebring, I think, is just incredible. It's very, very fast. It's blind. You can't see the apex when you turn in. You certainly can't see the track out, the end of the corner when you turn in. It's tremendously bumpy on exit, and it's just an awesome, awesome corner. You have to commit. You have to know where you're going, and you have to be confident going into turn one that you're going to survive coming out of turn one. And then turn 17, also very famous, the last corner on the track, kind of going under the Sunset Bend, they're calling it. There's a bridge, coming under that's a good reference point, but it's a super long corner. I mean, it's a 180-degree corner that it's just so long. And I love and hate turn 17 because I've never gone through and been like, that was the way to go through. There's so many. It's so wide. The entry's so wide. The exit's so wide that you never feel like you got it just perfectly right. And that's someone that's got thousands of laps there. So it's challenging. Sebring's interesting because there is maybe zero total elevation change. I'm trying to think if there's any hills or anything, but there's really not. So it's incredibly flat, which most tracks like that can be fairly boring, because there's just not that much character to a lot of corners. Like, oh, okay, it's a turn or whatever. But the bumps, of course, at Sebring are famously add a lot of character to it. So the history lesson is it's an old World War II bomber training, basically air base runway. So it's been there for 80 years now. And they've patched parts of it, but like turn one, the back straight, turn 16, turn 17 are all on that old concrete that's really, really bumpy. And I didn't fully get that. People would ask me, hey, Sebring's your home track. How do you deal with all the bumps? And I didn't know any better, right? So I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then I'd go drive like, a Coda or something that's just freshly repaved. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I get it now. But there's always a discussion online. There's kind of a continual discussion. Oh, they got to repave Sebring. It's this horrible surface and whatever. It's like, you can't do it,
It's
because
part
it
of
would
the
lose its
character.
character. Yeah, it
Yeah.
would lose its character. And I think, again, it's a very flat track. So there's like, I can't think of many flat racing tracks with basically no elevation that are held in super high regard, right? Like most have character because, oh, it's whatever, this downhill corner, this uphill corner, whatever it is, it adds challenge, it adds different, dynamic loading to a car. But Sebring's not like that. So if you took that away, it would be a lot more boring, to be perfectly honest with you. But there is still a lot of technical elements to it. There's, a lot of fast corners, a lot of mid-speed corners, and a couple of slower corners. So a car has to be pretty good at a lot of different things, especially a pretty unique kind of setup from a suspension standpoint because of the bumpy nature of the surface. And that's another thing. Indy cars test there all the time. So we talked about Indy cars racing at street circuits quite a bit. Well, it's impossible to test the street circuit because they're temporary, right? So they
True.
set them up, you race, and you go home. So they test at Sebring a lot because it's the most representative they can get of whatever, bumps on a normal road, right? They're not perfect, or potholes or manhole covers or whatever. It's the most representative that you can get and actually test at. So I think that's super interesting too. The car has to be set up much more compliant to
Mhm.
deal with bumps than it would be really anywhere else, and that adds a pretty unique challenge, or pretty unique, engineering aspect of it as well. So my favorite place in the world, man. I love it. I love it.
Man, I'm glad to hear that because it's always one I've wanted to learn. And again, maybe is some future stripping the dipping content. We'll have to go out there in the sim and you could maybe teach me a trick or two around there too because
Sure.
it's always a circuit that's eluded me. I've done it in time trials, I've hot lapped it, and it's like you mentioned, you always try a different line here, try braking earlier there, try getting on the power a bit earlier there. The suspensions just you just get used to that to be fair with all the bumps and compressions, but it's super awesome, man, and just great as well to get your insight into that as well. So we changed subject here. Black was saying, who sold you that tire that blew up? So he's on about liabilities here, and also we got Kevin. Shout out to Kevin as well, loyal subscriber as always. Big up to yourself, man. So before we get into the next one, then we've got a bit of F1 because we'd be remiss, man, if we didn't do some sort of F1 talk. So
Yep. Yep.
later this week, I think on Thursday, we've got the preseason testing at Bahrain before the start of the season. And Mike, I didn't know if you were keeping up much with some of the livery reveals, some of the team reveals, some of the car launches and stuff like that. But do you have any hot takes, coming into the Bahrain test for the teams, and also to throw it in there as well with my list of expansive questions? Um, like is what kind of approach do teams take, especially factory teams? You've worked quite well with Honda in developing a car and kind of making it compliant for certain purposes. For the factory drivers, like the Ferrari guys, the Mercedes guys, Alpine as well, how does their approach go to preseason testing? Can any inferences be drawn to the times as well? And also, yeah, is there anything as a driver, and you can speak from your own experiences, that you can give to a manufacturer or a factory team that they can work on at a preseason test that may get implemented later on into the season?
Yeah, a lot of questions. So remind me if I skip
Sure.
over anything that you mentioned there. But I think yeah, my kind of engineering background, I tend to be very interested, with the new car launches, and then Formula One. The website does a very good job of kind of initial technical analysis, and here's what's different, here's what we've noticed, and of course, some of that stuff may not be fully representative until they're on track for the actual testing. But from what I've seen, most of the cars are, as you'd expect, kind of evolutions of last year's designs. The regulations are fairly similar. People are copying a lot of what the fast teams have done. Red Bull, has some certain aspects that a lot of people are trying to understand and copying quite a bit, um, which is what they should do, right? If you're getting beat by someone, you got to do as close to them as you can get away with. Um, and the livery designs, I don't feel as strongly this year as I have in the past about some versus others. I like the you'll appreciate. I like the Mercedes, carbon fiber, basically unpainted, right? They're like, look,
Yeah.
we got to make weight, and here's a way to do it, and it looks cool. I'm a car nerd, and I think exposed carbon fiber is one of the coolest things that you can do. So I like that. Of course, from what they've done within the last few years, the black livery is makes sense for them too. It's not just like, oh, they're running the carbon car and it looks dumb. It's like, no, it's part of their history now as well. So that's
Yeah.
cool. A lot of the others are what you come to expect. The Red Bull, the Ferrari, kind of stuff that we've come to know and love. The Williams, that I know a lot of people are talking about the Duracell kind of air intake box. And my wife keeps getting frustrated because she's like, they rolled that out last year.
Last year,
But
I said the same
yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah. Because everyone's like, look at the, oh man, that's super cool. And I said the same. I was like, oh, that is cool. And she was like, they had that for like, I don't know how long, but at some point last year they rolled that out. And it's like, huh, Look it up online. Sure enough, they did. So people just weren't paying attention last year, I think. But that's a good one. I think it'll be, there's more rookies on the grid this year than there have been for a bit. I think the driver lineups are shaking up quite a bit, which will be interesting to watch. And then to your question about testing and how do they approach that, what can you take away from it? They're going to look for driver comfort. How easy is the car to drive, rather than all out lap times. But you can still take away the lap times with some value. These guys aren't going to be driving it 100%, but they're going to be driving it, whatever, 90%, let's call it. And okay, well, if my 90% is half a second faster than your 90%, my 100% is probably going to be faster than your 100%, right? So what they can comfortably drive the car at, call it a 90% level, there's certainly value to be taken from the objective data that's being put down. Now, there's differences between tire compounds, fuel levels, what time of day times are set at, and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of variables, but there is value to even just looking at lap times that people are going to be running.
Absolutely. And also, like, to touch on your kind of like engineering experiences as well there, Mike, like, how much feedback can you give a team and how much faith can you put in them to implement certain things in the balance of the car or the nature of the car, at a preseason test? Because in this modern day of Formula One, I imagine like all of our viewers can appreciate that because of the cost cap, if you've gone one direction with a car, like let's say Mercedes with the zero side pod concept, it's quite difficult, to try and get that kind of thing because that's the DNA of the chassis, how they've decided to underpin the aerodynamic philosophy of the car. But in terms of other things like, aero wash, or in terms of like brake bias, in terms of electronics, these other things a driver can tinker with behind the steering wheel. How is that, done between, driver like yourself and factory team back at base?
Sure. So the drivers, like I said, are at this point just looking for a car that they feel comfortable driving at, 9/10 or of course more. They might do some closer to 10/10 push laps, but if someone bends a car in testing, that's bad. So I wouldn't expect to see 10/10 driving, but of course you have to drive the car hard enough to know what it's going to do at the limit. So there's value to a push lap as well. But again, they're looking for a comfortable car. They might say, yeah, it's super fast, but it's very twitchy. Something that's, I'd say, pretty. What seems to be the common Red Bull design is, okay, well, Max is really good, so we can give him a car that's really crappy to drive, but it's going to be very, very fast, right? And there's maybe a small handful of drivers in the world that can get the most out of that car, and he's one of them. So good on him. But that's, in my opinion, why we've seen a lot of his teammates who have gone on to be relatively successful in other cars, Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, struggle in that car because of just the way that it's designed. So point being, the drivers can say, oh yeah, it's fast, but I can't drive this for 30 laps. I can do it for one, but I can't do it for 30. And what the teams will do is, as much as they can get away with, they'll do what's called a sweep, a data sweep, or an engineering sweep, or a spec sweep. There's a few different ways to call it, but what that means is they may take, they'll take the car, whatever they think their baseline setting. These guys have all driven these tracks quite a bit now, or raced at these tracks. Okay, this is our setup last year. Cars are pretty similar. Let's try taking the toe settings, so where the wheels are pointed in relation to the road, and they may go as far one direction as they can, in small increments. Say, okay, go do 5 laps. How's the car? Okay, more toe out. Okay, go do 5 laps. How's the car? Okay, go do 5 laps, and then change it back. Okay, toe in, toe in, toe in, so that they can have an understanding. Okay, every time we went more toe out, the car got better until this point. And then every time we went toe in, it got worse up to this, and it was just never any good. So they have an understanding of what direction to start chasing when they, of course, go to different tracks or have different characteristics. And then they'll do the same thing with other specs. They'll do it with camber, how far the tire is leaned in and out. They'll do that with camber. They may do that with aerodynamic elements. If they bring 2 or 3 or 4 different wings to a test, they may try all of them and say, okay, same, better, worse. It's like going to the eye doctor. Is that same, better, worse? Just so that they can have an understanding. Okay, well, that wing was good, but that wing was better in high speed, but worse in low speed. And they can take that back to base and say, okay, can you combine this design direction from the data that we've gathered, doing a kind of data sweep, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I think great technical response there as well, Mike, because as a fan, it's always interesting to know like how the teams go about a setup direction and how they will ease a driver into a sense of security to a point where they get comfortable with a car and its characteristics. Like you gave a great example of how Max Verstappen, he can drive a car that's really edgy and twitchy and nervous because that's the style of driving he has. Whereas somebody like Sergio Perez likes the car more almost kind of docile and more secure, but in that
Mm.
sense, it's that security which enables him to push and search for lap time as well. So you can go about achieving that lap time in different ways. So that's interesting. And to line it up a bit, and I'll go over to question 9 because we'll wrap the 8th into the 10th. Uh, you know, we got obviously a lot of Formula One fans that follow the podcast. And I was thinking, Drive to Survive, the Netflix phenomenon, is due for a response, I think, at some point this week. But Mike, if you had to be the director, if the Netflix producers come over to you, in a nice Cadillac with a big chunky bag of money inside, and they say, Mike, want you to direct a Drive to Survive spin-off series on another motor racing class that's not Formula One, which series did you pick and why?
Oh, I mean, of course, selfishly, I'd pick some form of sports car racing.
Mhm.
I think IMSA has some fascinating stuff. SRO has some fascinating stuff, but that's being selfish. I think, quite honestly, I'm sure it's being talked about, if not being worked on already, because of the just incredible success of Drive to Survive. Um, it could, if it's done right, it would be very interesting in any of the series. Depending on what angle you take. You mentioned, Michael Jordan investing into a NASCAR team and Bubba Wallace, and this minority ownership is fascinating in a predominantly white, historically Southern. There's a massively interesting angle to that.
Mhm.
IndyCar, like I said, there's 20 different drivers that could win any week on the grid. They race at 3 different types of circuit that nobody else in the world does. IMSA, you've got GTP, it's the new glory days, and you've got all these manufacturers and all that. SRO, it's a little bit, can be a little bit more um, kind of gentleman driver. And what does that look like, for the individual that's driving the car, their pro co-driver, whatever it is. So again, well, without sharing too much, but I know that those talks are happening, and people want to get in on the
Ooh.
hype of the success that Drive to Survive very clearly. We've seen it in other sports. I think there's a golf one. I think there's a tennis one. I haven't spent any time watching them, but I've seen some trailers, and I'm like, oh, okay. I'm very much not interested in golf, but for 30 seconds there, I was like, ooh, okay. That you're telling a story about people, and I think for other sports, it's easier to see people as people.
Mhm.
A golfer, a tennis player, you can see what they look like. You can see their mannerisms, their facial expressions, that kind of stuff. Race car drivers, you just see a car or maybe a helmet or whatever, and it's very hard to understand these people as people. So I think that's why Drive to Survive had so much success, is, especially in the female audience, and not to say that it didn't have a huge following for guys as well, but the female audience, maybe more so, wants a story, right?
Mhm.
And now, oh, okay, that's who this person is. That's why this guy gets along with this guy. That's why this guy doesn't get along with this guy. Oh, he's funny. Oh, he's, whatever. And it makes them much more relatable. And now you have someone to cheer for. Now you understand, oh, that race for 12th place isn't paying any points, but that dude hates that dude. So they're going to scrap for every single inch of the track. Right. So
Sure.
I think that's easier to understand in other sports, because we can see the human aspect of it much more easily than we can in racing. So to actually answer your question, though, I really don't think you can go wrong if it was done well.
Oh man, well, I mean, it's an interesting take there as well, Mike, and I agree with you. You know, you really touched on some good points there in terms of with motor racing, we see a guy or a girl behind a helmet, and often we don't really see the emotional aspect of it until the driver's outside the car or on the podium or chatting to the media. And like you mentioned as well, just the kind of insight even to not necessarily the guys fighting at the top for honors, but even the midfield drivers, even the drivers at the bottom of the pecking order fighting their way even just for a seat the following season can make for an easy and an interesting kind of narrative as well. So looking forward to seeing how they go forward with it in Formula One this year, but then to also see it in other series as well would be amazing. So that would be cool. And to round it off as well, Mike, because you've been amazing and we really appreciate your time. And there's kind of two more things we wanted to get on as well before we conclude this amazing episode is, you know, I'm sure there's gonna be lots of listeners and viewers that might even watch this podcast episode after that want to know more about the work that you do with the Skip Barber School and kind of like, you know, if they're in the States, like how can they get involved with that? What does a training session or program or experience look like? And also as well, what would you say are your personal goals for this season in terms of ambitions or new things you want to aim for over the course of this season?
Sure. So I'll start with the Skip Barber stuff. So yeah, I do, like I said, a lot of coaching, some, private clients, that, I just kind of on my own, I'm wearing my Mo Motorsports hat. That's my own
Whoop,
personal brand right there.
promo.
Yeah, that's right. And then, yeah, I also, am fortunate to work with kind of the most, preeminent racing school in North America, historically, which is Skip Barber. So, um, I've done a program at Circuit of the Americas in the last month, Sonoma, California within the last month. I think I mentioned that earlier. And interestingly, tying back to NASCAR, I'll add a little bit more color to that. We actually had a couple of NASCAR guys out at Circuit of the Americas
Ah,
because a lot of these guys, again, they have tremendous car control. They grow up, racing, dirt track, circle track, whatever it is, and they're really good at circles. But okay, well, now they're adding more road courses to the mix, and they come to a school like Skip Barber to say, "Hey, I want to get a little bit better at road racing. How does that differentiate itself?" And again, these are very high level folks, that you'd be like, "Oh, well, they know enough," but they're humble enough to say, "Oh, well, these guys are experts in road racing. Maybe I can learn a thing or two, and also get a few laps at a track that I haven't really driven before, or not driven that much, because the testing limitations are fairly tight in NASCAR. You can only test so much in your car or a representative car. So going to a racing school that's in not a NASCAR basically, is okay. So it's an opportunity for them to go drive the track. But anyway, that just points to the kind of quality of the program that we like to think that we put on, and kind of our go-to entry-level standpoint is called a 3-day racing school. So they're all over the country. Like I said, was at California, Circuit of the Americas. I'm going to VIR, so Virginia International Raceway next week. We go to Lime Rock up in Connecticut when it's less cold up there. We do Sebring occasionally. We do, all over the place. Road Atlanta sometimes. So anyway, the 3-day racing school will do some car control modules to start, some classroom, getting people up to kind of the same level of, okay, when we talk about basic vehicle dynamics, here's understeer, oversteer, throttle inputs, what that does to dynamics, brake inputs, same thing. And then go practice that a little bit in some car control modules, which then flows into a lead follow exercise where, again, you're maybe learning a track that you've never been on before, or maybe you've never been in a race car before. You get some opportunity to do that behind a pace car that's kind of showing you where to go, where to place the car, where to get on power, where to apply the brakes, in a controlled speed, so that you're not just out there figuring it out yourself. That moves into day 2, which is what we call stop box sessions. So basically, you'll do a lap of the track, come to a stop on the track every single time, and there will be instructors at corners watching you, making notes with a radio. And I'll come on and say, "Hey, this is Mike. I'm watching you up here in turn 1. You missed your apex by 5 feet. Get your vision up, et cetera, et cetera." And then you'll come through the next time and you'll do a lot better. and then someone in turn two will go, hey, you turned in early over here in turn two, whatever. So you get instant feedback, and doing lap after lap after lap that you can implement very quickly. We'll then get into, on the third day, usually we will get into a passing exercise, learning how to pass cars, how to place the car, how to set up a pass, and then practice race starts, which is one of the coolest things ever. Where, okay, 3 days ago you'd never been in a race car before, now you're in a pack of whatever 5 to 10 cars, taking a green flag for the first time, and everyone hits the throttle, and it's just the coolest feeling in the world. And that's kind of the very simple overview of the 3-day program. Of course, with some classroom sessions sprinkled in, usually to begin the day, usually, in the middle of the day to kind of separate the different units that we're doing. And we'll do that either in Mustang GTs, which are kind of the early 2000s Mustangs, and just an excellent school car, fairly big, fairly heavy. They're on street-ish, aggressive street-ish suspension, aggressive street-ish tires. So you get a lot of body roll, you get a lot of feedback from the cars, feedback from the tires, enough power to get you in trouble, but not so much that it's gonna, really kill you if you treat it right. It's pretty responsive. And then we also do it in proper Formula 4 racing cars. So, a totally different experience. Aero, wings, downforce, slick tires, totally different experience, and a little bit more difficult maybe to get into if you've never been in a race car, but it's like nothing else. Driving those cars is like, nothing else if you've never done it before. So we'd also offer a 1-day program, which is basically the first day of the 3-day program is exactly the same as the 1-day program. And then we offer a 2-day advanced program, which is more open lapping and gets into some more advanced concepts, such as the passing. Instead of being a cone module, you're actually passing with instructors in cars. So how to pass, how to be passed, how to set up a car, and then doing some lead follow with instructors that is very helpful at pace as well. So, but we do everything, man. We've had people come in and, hey, I want to coach, I want some private coaching in my own car. Okay, great. Hey, I want to, do private coaching in a Formula 4 car. Great. There's all kinds of stuff that we do. There's a Formula 4 racing series that is now the entry level step to the Road to Indy ladder. So that's a really, really cool, a series that we ran last year, but now has even more kind of prestige for 2023. Super cool. And then again, like I said, we get guys that come through, NASCAR guys want to do private coaching to get better at running the track, and we can do all that. So it's been a good time, and looking forward to doing plenty more with them, from next week. So.
That's awesome to hear, Mike. And I think as well, like in terms of Skip Barber, great, you're a great ambassador for them for the most part. Let's get that in there. But also really all-encompassing school as well. I mean, for like you mentioned, someone like a NASCAR driver that's a professional racing driver anyway, but wanting to get sharp in those areas of car control, or like learning an actual race circuit in terms of apexes and kind of different styles of corners. But then also, for a complete novice that has no experience whatsoever driving a car and being able to get that experience is amazing. So big shout out to Skip Barber. And of course as well, we'd love to kind of learn more and to kind of like keep a tab on that too. So we'll have you on future episodes to go through that as well. And also we've got Mr. Blag inside here. And he brought up something that was quite a good point, actually. He said, how is Mo Motorsport going? Last time you played on the podcast, you mentioned you're taking the decision to go all in. So, yeah, to tie it in as well with the final question, like goals for the season. And, you mentioned your own kind of brand as well. What are you looking forward to the most in this year? And what would you look forward to, reflecting at the back of the end of the year, would you say?
Yeah, that's a perfect tee up. So thanks for the question there. And yeah, so again, I've touched on my kind of engineering background a little bit, but for those of you that haven't, didn't watch the previous episode, or didn't listen to the previous podcast, I spent 6 years as a design engineer at Nissan. Went to college for engineering. mechanical design. So I was a chassis design engineer, so wheels, tires, hubs, axles, springs, shocks, all the fun bits that make cars, handle well. Um, and was instructing and coaching on the side as much as I could. But in the motorsports world, like many industries, I was getting, I'd say, good enough and busy enough that I was starting to have to turn down opportunities to go do things in motorsports. And once you say no, you usually don't get a second call. So um, very fortunate to have a supportive family, supportive wife who was like, look, like if you're gonna do this and you're good at this, like go do it. So after a pretty long period of considering that opportunity, I did that early last year, and I've been building. Again, doing a lot of work with Skip Barber, starting to build a client base on my own of folks that want kind of my own coaching outside of within that realm, um, and it's going well. I'm trying to find reasons to be at racetracks is the way that I used to usually say it. Whether that's coaching, whether that's driving, doing other stuff as well. I just love being at racetracks and making me go faster, making other people go faster, making cars go faster. Is why we do what we do. So, and kind of my goals for this year, I'm still the racing the racing seat game, again, to anyone that's watched Drive to Survive, is that's a pretty extreme example, but it is you're always working on what are you doing next, and it's difficult. So I'm still working on some opportunities to do some pro racing this year. We'll see what shakes out. But the focus right now is honestly we're running that Scirocco. Again, we've developed it and made it faster than it's ever been, and trying to go win the runoffs at Virginia International Raceway. That's kind of the goal, is to go perform well at these Super Tour events, and then win the SCCA runoff. So the next race is at Road Atlanta, I believe, in early March. So that'll be the next one. Trying to be successful with that, and again, just kind of a special effort. Again, with my dad, being involved in a car that he had helped develop. Just always a cool thing to do with family. So that's the goal. Of course, always trying to find opportunities to go do pro racing as well. But there's a huge amount of love and passion that's going into trying to win runoffs with the Scirocco this year.
Oh, that's amazing to hear, Mike. And again, I think, even from the story perspective as well, that's awesome that, you have a car which has been in the family. You guys have worked on it countlessly, all the expertise, all the knowledge, even the battle scars of the car on the circuit, and still kind of bringing it back to, be better, stronger, more competitive, from time to time. And now even being in the runoff series is incredible, and a testament to you, your experience, your talent, to be able not only to have it on the track, but to teach others, I think, is a huge gift, man. So, from us here at Stripping the Dipping, always excited and always keen to know what you're doing, and always excited to know what's next, in your motorsport journey. So we're super excited to see that, as always. And before you go, Mike, just, please tell us where our viewers can find you, because that's the big thing with this podcast. And the thing, not to run in circles, that Georgina always says, is that she started it as a way of, giving fans a different outlook, a different perspective on motorsport, because motorsport is much bigger than just Formula One. And I'll put my neck on the line and say that, And when we get the opportunity to connect with amazing individuals, brilliant individuals like yourself that have been through, everything, from the ground up, and achieve the things that you have, it's incredible and gives us so much insight and so much knowledge. So super thankful to you, Mike. But yeah, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, where can they find you?
Yeah, perfect. And again, thank you guys for having me on here. It's enjoyed my time last time on the podcast, and then this is my first live. Where you gotta look at my face here and deal with that. So I appreciate you having me back, and some really interesting conversations. So I appreciate that. But I'm most active on Instagram. And it's at Mike.Ogren, my last name, Ogren. A lot of anytime I'm at a racetrack, I'm posting stuff about what I'm doing. That's where I do most of my social media stuff. I found that I actually have a really nice community on there, and love to keep adding to it. Not the biggest following, and that's that's okay. I'm building towards that, but the people that it's small enough that I can still engage really closely with people that are interested and ask questions and have conversations. So at Mike.Ogren. I do some Facebook. Mike Ogren Racing is the name of the page I run on Facebook. Um, Usually just a little bit more kind of landmark activity on Facebook, kind of highlights. And then I have a YouTube channel as well that I would have to remind myself what the actual URL is. But if you search Mike Ogren uh, Racing or something like that, you should come to it pretty easily. Um, I try to upload racing videos and onboards and stuff like that, but that is tends to become a little bit of a backlog because, as you probably know, it is fairly time intensive to upload video, and I find that I'm often running off to a racetrack instead of uploading videos. So, but that's that's one of my goals for this year is to be better about getting video online because to me onboards are like super interesting to watch. So I'll try. I'll commit to that. There's my deal for one of my goals for this year is follow me on YouTube, and I'll be better about getting videos up. So how about that?
That's an awesome deal there, Mike. And one we're going to keep you to as well. So
Fair
we
enough.
love that as always. That's great to hear. And, we've got a couple of last comments in here before we go. So RVD with the clap. Thank you so much, bro. Thank you to all the amazing viewers that have been in today. Abby, Georgina, obviously F1, Blag as well, Kevin, MJ, just all the amazing people that have like contributed and been, tuning in and out as well to all the amazing stuff we've been talking about. Blag as well saying, we'll keep following your path, which we will indeed. And he's added to that. And that Sirocco, which also is quite
Perfect.
cool to add as well. It's amazing. But Mike, it's been amazing, man. We'll have to do another episode with you later on in the year to see how you're getting in and, just to talk motorsport as well, because there's always a story to be told and always something to talk about in our kind of like favorite thing that we do best. So yeah, Mike, it's been a pleasure to have you as always. Guys in here as well, make sure you slap the like button. Make sure that you subscribe as well. Make sure you check out Mike's platforms on all social media. We'll come back and edit this post stream so you guys can find it easily. And yeah, this is amazing to have amazing guests like you, Mike. Big honor. And yeah, we're wishing you all the best and following you all the way.
Thanks so much.
Oh, no worries at all. Well, guys, until next time, it's been your boy AMG Dent, aka the modern day Morgan Freeman, with those legendary intros, outros, whatever you want to call them. And yeah, amazing to have Mike on as well. A really good friend and a special guest for us. And it's always an honor to speak to him. So shout out to Mike. Make sure you go and follow him. And yeah, until next time, peace. We out.